Welcome to Roaming with Restless Women, real talk with wise, dynamic women leaders. I'm Julie Noonan, your host, CEO, and founder of Intuitive Wisdom Coaching, and I'm living my dream life. I live and work in my RV, coaching senior women leaders as they navigate corporate politics, family drama, and personal goals to live their own dream lives. These women are restless. They are never done seeking new opportunities, learning, and ways to create value in the world. If you'd like to apply to be a guest, stick around to the end of the show and I'll let you know how. So let's go. Hi, and welcome back to Roaming with Restless Women. I am very excited to introduce you today to Atima Omara. Atima and I met when we were in a class together and was called the Academy. And we were both young entrepreneurs and we were getting our businesses put together. She was very much further along than I was at the time, but I just remember how sage her advice was. And I just really was excited that she agreed to be on the show. So welcome, Atima.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay. So let me introduce you formally. Atima Omara is an award-winning leader, strategist, advocate, working at the intersection of electoral politics and progressive movement. She's a CEO and founder of Omara Strategy Group, a political and advocacy consulting firm that provides training, coaching, and strategic advice to progressive candidates, organizations, and projects that focus on women, people of color, and other underrepresented communities in their mission and work. Atima, a strategist, organizer, and advocate with close to 20 years in national politics, focuses on training and innovative strategies that win elections, inform policy, and build a more reflective democracy. I was excited to actually see Atima on several news channels recently during the election season, and I'm sure she's quite tired at this point with all of the requests for interviews, and so I'm especially excited to have her at this juncture. Mm-hmm. Atima has been widely quoted as well in a number of outlets like the Washington Post, The Atlantic, Politico, The Hill, USA Today, and she's been published in The Nation, American Prospect, Ebony, The Root, and a lot of others. We don't have time to list all of her awards and accomplishments, but just suffice to say that she's a powerhouse, and I'm honored to have her on my show.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just so excited. I can't even tell you. So, obviously, politics has been top of mind for most of us over the last year or more. Mm-hmm. It's an exhausting subject for most of us at this point. We've kind of had it up to here with the political stuff. Tell me then a bit about why you got into this profession to begin with. What was it that drew you so well into this?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was thinking about that and people always ask me, like, how did you get involved, be engaged? And it was, I mean, it's funny too, because I have like two immigrant parents. They'd have been thrilled if I had been a doctor, a lawyer, pharmacist, pick like something like real stable career, W-2, all of that. And I got interested in politics because I was very involved on my campus at university. And I just was doing a lot of stuff. I initially took one semester of chemistry. And I was like, well, that doctor thing is not happening. And then I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll do the law, but I also did some other humanity, like fun things on campus. Like I was writing for my student newspaper, got interested enough in journalism because a lot of folks loved my writing that, you know, I had done an internship at a larger state paper in Virginia, and then was actually in the process of interviewing with the Washington Post for an internship, hilariously. And then I decided that I really wanted to get in politics in my final year. Just my experience with student government and just working together to kind of improve things in our student body just really got me thinking about the process in general. And, you know, I was just of a very firm belief that, you know, I was in college, just the Bush years were kind of, you know, coming to, I think, an end of the first term, beginning of the second term. You know, if you're not, you know, you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that's always been sort of has guided my opinion as to why, you know, certain folks should be more engaged in politics. Like there's an interest it was interesting keeping certain perspectives and certain people from certain communities out historically of this country. And I thought, you know what, I'm daughter of two immigrants, Black woman. I've got, family members who have disability. I care a lot about reproductive rights. Like I should find a way to be involved in this process. And so that's really the beginning of sort of me wanting to work in politics, policy, all of that. So
So how did you get started in your career? Did you just immediately start with your own business, or did
oh,
you? That would have been,
no, that would have been it's so interesting too, because I think a lot of your listeners might relate to this, because I think a lot of your folks might come out of corporate America or that
yes.
experience, especially getting into politics back then and kind of the early aughts, mid aughts, was before the Obama presidency. It was very, very predominantly white male, in Congress, and who ran the major political consulting firms, the lobby shops. If you think
Yes.
about like the media, like the shows, it was mostly the white guys battling it out on different perspectives. And it was interesting because it was all about policies and politics that like didn't really sort of affect them in the same way that it would affect you and I, right? As like women of color and whatnot. And so at first it was just getting involved in the process was sort of also it was kind of closed door in some ways, because back then, the whole industry was just unpaid internships, right? Like,
Wow.
and so like, other people, I talk to people and they're like, wait, what? Like even with law internships, you get paid, with corporate internships, you get paid. Getting into politics back then, especially, a lot of unpaid internships, which would end up sort of recycling a certain perspective and a certain person who could afford to move down to DC and
Yes.
be a full-time intern. And it would be, somebody from a donor family or somebody who was from a politically connected family that had more resources and didn't have to wait tables. So if you were somebody like myself, you would have to like wait tables, work two other jobs while, doing a full-time internship on the Hill, or for a nonprofit. I remember actually what changed sort of the decision for me, because I actually, after graduation, I was like, let me just move to DC. Like everybody else is moving to DC. That's where the action's at.
Yeah.
And I was offered an internship. And so I was like, okay, I could do this internship and then go find a job. So I asked, how much. It was unpaid. Um, and I was like, to move to Washington, D.C. And I was not as expensive as it was like now, but like back then it was still pretty expensive. I grew up in a small town, like just outside, like in Southern Virginia. And I was like, I can't ask my parents to pay for my rent for 3 months. Like, and they said, well, some folks wait tables. And I was like,
Yeah.
and having worked in a restaurant, I was like, I know how much you make. It's a lot of hours just to cover cost of living.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so I didn't end up taking that job. And I coincidentally around the same time, somebody had referred me my resume. She had a connection, somebody I went to college with somebody at the governor's mansion at that time, Mark Warner, who's now U.S. Senator, was governor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was looking, had a couple people leaving and they need somebody to fill in. And I didn't realize this, but the chief of staff's son had gone to the same university as me. And so it was well timed because I think he was just in a mindset to be a little like favorable. I was like, oh, somebody from my son's class, like whatnot. And so, and I'd had a good experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
I ended up getting hired to work in, state government. That was my first full political job. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Oh, okay. And then
Yeah.
you fell in love with it there too, or
Yeah, I
how
was
long did you
very
work in that? And
I was there for
yeah.
about a year. I was there for a
Okay.
year. And state government and government in general is very interesting. It's sort of the regular hours of like, what you would at any other job, like kind of a desk job. But, sometimes you'd have additional things to do. So I, during our General Assembly, when our state legislature was in session, it was busier. I had more work to do. I had to listen in on, like, I would track certain pieces of legislation in my portfolio, develop responses
Mhm.
to constituents who are inquiring about them, or answer, legislative campaigns, make recommendations on, well, this is getting a lot of pushback, and, tell the comms office about it. So, maybe the governor wants to have a response, whatever that might be. It was during the time that we were doing a huge economic plan push. So we were sometimes attending town halls, which was fascinating for me to kind of see that process. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I also found myself, some folks were like, oh, I'm going to continue working in state government and policy, and that's my thing. But I found myself very interested in campaigns. And the presidential reelection was coming up in 2004, like Bush was going to run for reelection. And so I was like, well, I want to experience what the campaign side of things are. And so, luckily through my own volunteer work, I'd met somebody who suggested, hey, I know they're looking for a volunteer director on the campaign. And so that's how I ended up getting very involved, and went from state government to then working in the campaign part of the political and government world. So,
Oh, I bet the campaign part is well, it has to be intense, but it
yes.
also has to be a lot of fun because of the variety, and you can plan until the
Yeah.
cows come home. And then
Yeah.
something will happen and you have to switch gears all of a sudden, I would imagine.
Yeah, that is exactly how it is, very much how it is.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like to say, like, especially, and, for those who are listening who are entrepreneurs and yourself, that when you have like a launch of a project or some
Yes.
new offering in the business, it's very, very hectic. And I would probably say that's the closest to that experience. Except like the launch is more like the end date of the campaign on election day, right? And so you're just working these like wild hours, and something happens abruptly, you got to switch tack, you got to do something new. I enjoyed the rhythm, I enjoyed the energy of it. Yeah.
So what was it that prompted you to start your business?
Yeah, so I've been doing I did, like, let's see, I did campaigns. I worked for a labor union. I worked for a voter registration organization. Did a whole bunch of just different, like, kind of got
Wow.
the full experience of all the things in politics. And 2016 happened, and
Yeah.
lots of folks were like, "Well, what do I do?" Like, because there was very much the expectation that Hillary Clinton was going to win, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
we're just gonna get through this, and Hillary Clinton was gonna win. Like, I know people who, um, she literally told me, like, she was on transition. She had worked in Veterans Affairs,
Mm-hmm.
and had worked for a member of Congress, who was top on veteran, and I think they thought he might be in line for a VA appointment, but if not the secretary, then like somewhere high up. So she was on that full transition for the Clinton team. She said, I had my briefing book materials ready. I had my train ticket booked to New York for the day after the election. I said, I know a bunch of other people. They were literally like getting their materials together, get ready to submit their like resignation, like all getting ready to start investing in what would be the transition. And
Yeah.
then within like, 24 hours, that on election day, I was like completely gone. And, a lot of folks were like, well, what do we do in this world? Some folks decide to run for office. Some folks decide to go back out on the campaign trail. And I, had run for office before. That was in part of also my journey. So I'd had that experience. And I'd worked in a bunch of campaigns, and I was like, I want to be able to provide a service to these people who are now ignited to run for office because they saw who got elected, and they're like, oh, wait, if he got elected, like all these women who were stepping up to run, all these younger folks who were stepping up to run, these folks of, you know, a diverse backgrounds, who were immigrants, people of color, like just all these people. And I was, you know, I said, you're going to enter into a process that's going to be strange and weird to you, and you're going to come in earnest. And how can I help those candidates, whether it's through training or coaching? And also work with organizations who want to
Mhm.
turn out these now motivated and engaged voters and people who are just frustrated and don't know what to do.
Right.
And so that for me seemed better, an opportunity to work with a whole bunch of folks as opposed to limit myself to working with one candidate at a time as a campaign manager or field director or something, or being a candidate for public office. That seemed to be the best fit. And that's sort of what motivated me to start my business, because, you know, I otherwise, had Hillary Clinton won for myself, I would have been yeah, I either would have been like, I was at Javits Center in New York. I had done a lot for the campaign where Clinton was hosting her election night party. You know, I was expecting either I'd have like a chance at a job in the administration, or I'd go work at a nonprofit where a lot of people had left to go work for the administration. That world was gone. This seemed to be the best way to contribute my skill set in the new reality. And I've been doing that ever since. So,
That's it. Well, and I would say, you know, it's one thing to help an individual start a company when there's tons and tons and tons of business coaches, there's tons and tons and tons of resources available to you that can help you do that, the SBA, whatever.
mhm,
Going in to run for office and going into a political space is an
mhm,
entirely different ball of wax.
yeah,
Working for a government entity is an entirely different ball of wax. And so I could
mhm,
imagine that individuals, you know, who had never been exposed to that level, like you were
mhm,
saying, a lot of people of color and younger people and, you know, immigrants were coming to the fore wanting to get involved. Um, that political machine, without
mhm,
someone like you, would have
mhm.
ripped them to pieces.
Yeah.
I would
I mean, and
imagine.
there are, yeah, and there are a lot of, you know, there are a lot of folks who run for office, found themselves chewed up and spit out by all of the ways in which politics can sort of, you know, you're not ready for it, right? Whether
Right.
it's, you know, I talk to candidates about, you know, have you done research on yourself, like on your background? Have you had somebody like literally do a background check and find stuff about you because the tax bill you didn't pay is going to
It's going
come
to come up.
up and bite you in the behind, right? Like
Mhm.
it's so unfair. Like I say this knowing the guy who is, you know, gonna be in the White House in January, and a lot of his appointees have a lot of this stuff, but like, you know, accepted on this podcast that, you know, I think your people are smart enough to know that it's double standards for women. So I was working with folks who you know, I was like, listen, it's a double standard, it is absolute nonsense, but this is the reality.
Mhm.
You know, dealing with figuring out how to fundraise, because you got to ask people for money, and women are really good asking people for money for their kids Girl Scout cookies,
Oh yeah.
uh those school plays, the bake offs, the helping out with, you know, family stuff, real good at it. But like asking money, people feel like for it's hard
For
enough doing it for
themselves.
public office for themselves.
Right.
And I'm like, this is not for you. I'd have to go through the mindset shift of it's not for yourself, it's for the
Right.
greater good, right? But
Yes.
it's a hump to get folks over, because when you look at who in the certainly in the Democratic Party does most of the activism, does a lot of the fundraising, it is by far women, especially women of color. And you're seeing them doing the right, going up, rising up through the ranks of political parties and organizations. And it's always just a shift to think of, you
Yeah.
know, themselves as the leader, as a candidate, putting themselves out there. Luckily lots has changed in the last few years,
Oh yeah.
um as a result of the 2016 election, but that was always something I dealt with, like how media is just going to treat you differently. People saw that with Hillary Clinton, but they experienced it themselves, us women candidates especially. And so, I mean, I knew some folks who, they thought they were going to run and people be like, oh, you're wonderful, you're great, you've done, good experience in the community, and they had, and people would tell them that, and then they would turn around when they're candidates for public office. Well, now, it's not your turn. You know, Joe over here has
Mm,
put in his time and, we'll support you next time. And, I just countless story after story and all of that that would happen. And so some would just walk after the process and not getting the support. They'd either drop out or they'd make
yeah.
it through the election, but then they'd just be like, I'm done. And then others who were like mad as hell and were like, I'm gonna do this again. I just would hear kind of countless stories through my
Oh,
training or
yeah.
my coaching work. Yeah.
Well, how do you stay motivated?
Oh,
Because I'm sure that the emotional roller coaster
mhm.
of a campaign. You've put so much work into it, and it's crazy
Yeah.
hours and all that, and then you don't get the result that you want. How do
Mhm.
you stay motivated to continue, not only helping those candidates, but also building your business and staying in it, even when it could be so incredibly rough.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I wouldn't be in this if I wasn't fundamentally like a hopeful person, right? And it's like
Yeah.
a funny question to ask me, especially now. I put all this in and, the results in the presidential election are not what I hoped for, and I'd
Mm-mm.
worked for. But because I was thinking about this, and I said, and it keeps going. Like
Yeah.
it, I have you talk about this in my podcast, embracing your voice, where I talk about, you know, what what happened basically, and but what do we focus on from here? And some of it is just, um, I think of the bright lights that did happen, the bright spots in this election. Two Black women were elected to the U.S. Senate. First time in history that
Yes.
two, it's usually one at a time. It's now finally
Right.
two.
Yes.
We elected, a young trans woman to Congress, Sarah McBride. Lots of reproductive rights measures passed to protect access for reproductive health care in states across 7 states. Initiatives to raise the minimum wage, protect climate.
Right.
There are good things that passed in the states. It's just, the top of the ticket. And she didn't lose by much. The numbers are showing that, like, she kept up with the 2020 numbers. He just of Biden's, but he um Trump like just got more. He managed to actually turn out a little bit more this time around, even from his numbers in 2020.
Right.
So it's something, it's a whole other
But if
analysis of
you
how that.
but if you
Yeah.
put that into perspective, though, she had what, 3 months at the
She had like
most?
107 days,
Yeah,
107
okay.
days. And that's
Come
pretty
on.
great, right? That's pretty
What
great.
she
That's what I've told
did was
people.
freaking
Yeah.
amazing. And the other thing I think that was wonderful about it was you didn't hear so much about she's a woman.
Hmm. Yeah.
You really did hear people asking about what's her policy stance or what's she going to do different than Biden or
Yeah.
what's her contribution to the economy or not, et cetera, et cetera. So I remember when Hillary was running, it was way
Hmm.
more about man versus woman. This time
Woman.
it
Yeah.
wasn't as much, and I
Yeah.
really take that as a positive as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm one of those that, the day after I'm posting me in a Xena outfit. Yeah, I'm mad
Yeah.
as hell. And for anybody that's on here that,
Yeah.
is of the other persuasion, I got you too. The only problem is, we just disagree on some stuff and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens next. All I know is I'm going to continue to support women.
I mean,
Bottom
and
line.
I will write, and I will agree that, those are the things that kind of keep me going, right? It's like, oh, okay, like it wasn't like this major sort of landslide defeat. She did as well as, Biden did in 2020. It just wasn't enough. Like she actually hit the
Right,
numbers that she needed to hit in those battleground states. People didn't make a fuss about, I mean, if they did, they weren't voting for her, right? But a whole
right.
bunch of people were like, yes, I'm going to vote for you. Yes, I respond to your policy. Nobody made an issue about the fact that she didn't take her husband's name. No, like there were some people who
Nope.
tried to say that she wasn't a mother because she was a stepmother. That didn't go over well in a country that has more blended families and more people who are products of divorce than
Yes.
not. It made her more relatable, quite frankly, and her
Yeah.
relationship with her stepchildren. So I loved all of those things that were an indicator of progress. But we still have a bit of ways to go before we get another woman president. For me, I try to, so that's for me. I try to stay motivated by the bright spots. It's been a bit of a struggle. Because I'm thinking to myself, there is sort of an environment now, uh, especially we're seeing it now with younger men who are really sort of buying into this
Macho shit. Sorry.
macho. I know, I mean, like honestly. They
Her
call it the
patriarchal
manosphere.
BS.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, right. They call it the manosphere podcast and stuff. And it's some scary stuff.
Yeah.
Um so we still have a lot of work to do, I think, culturally, but seeing those small wins keeps me focused and motivated. And how we're going to help the people who will be affected by the administration in not positive ways. How are we going to help them also too, and like trying to
Right.
keep them front of mind?
Yeah, we're going to be doing some damage control, I would
Mm-hmm,
imagine.
for
So,
sure.
what is the most challenging thing about being a woman of color and owning your own company, particularly, in a field that is very, who you know is who
Hmm.
kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So starting just, I mean, looking at the numbers for
Yeah.
just women in business, there is always, it is always more challenging to start a business as a woman, getting
Yes.
access to capital, all of that. Then you add in being a woman of color, specifically a Black woman. I was reading, and that's where my work in politics kind of gets interesting because it's relatable to other industries. I'd written a piece on the similarities between Black women in business and politics. And Black women candidates have a lot of issues sometimes getting people to fund and support them. And that is the same for Black women in business. They are the fastest growing entrepreneurial segment in like business, but they're like point something five or whatever. It's like the access to capital is absolutely rough for somebody who
Abysmal.
is
Yeah.
abysmal, right? Like access to capital, like it's already like a small portion for women, and then when you go down to Black women, it's like it's so small, the access to capital, and so a lot of businesses will fold by like year 3, 4, 5 because they self-funded their
Mm.
way. I think
Oh,
most
yeah.
folks can understand that, but they have to keep doing it. They're not getting access to those capital, those opportunities. They're not getting the clients even to keep it going. So being on, even in my industry, it gets even tougher because most of somebody who was a candidate for public office, the bulk of a lot of the major contracts will go to a lot of white male led consulting firms. There's been some policies and practices to change that. But it's still a work in progress. But my business is sort of a bit of a unicorn in that I'm like, just came out into year 7. I passed the 5-year mark, what they call maturation. That most Black women businesses will fold before they hit the
Mm.
5 year mark and past the 5 year mark, and I've been able to, bring in clients, hire subcontractors, hire an assistant, and really just keep things going. And so, um, it's a challenge. It's a challenge that what I say, the sweat and the tears, probably a little blood drawn here the whole time. The challenge. So I definitely 1000% salute a lot of Black women who, women who are just trying to start businesses and transition their careers, especially if they didn't grow up around it. But I'm also, it's challenging when you're a Black woman in the space, and especially in industry where, yeah, it's still a lot of the work is slanted and a lot of the big contracts are going to a lot of white men. So,
Well, I have three questions that I like to
mhm.
ask at the end of every episode. And it
Yeah.
always feels like I want to ask you about a million more questions at this point.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah.
The first one is a little unconventional. So if you will close your eyes real quick.
Oh, okay. All right.
And describe the picture that appears in your mind when I say
Mhm.
wise woman, and then open your eyes and describe that picture.
Oh goodness. Wise woman. I mean, I kind of am like, I very much picture somebody who's like older, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, who is uh, probably isn't wearing a lot of makeup, probably like wearing something comfortable and casual. I'm very in tune and love being around the ocean and hearing the ocean. So she's like walking along her beach and just like, loving life. I don't know, for those of you who have any Bridgerton fans, on your
Yes.
podcast, but there's one of the older uh, characters on the show, and one of the younger women was saying, well, I don't know why I have to follow these rules because you haven't don't follow these rules. And she's like, I have earned the right not to follow these rules. I have lived, I have loved, I have lost, like all of these things. And
Yes.
I was like, yes, ma'am.
I know exactly the character you're talking about.
Yes,
She's my favorite, actually.
yeah,
She
she's
is my
definitely
favorite.
my favorite. I'm like aspiration to be her.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
older.
we would love, oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so second to last question. Where do you like to roam?
Where do I like to roam? Is that like a larger, like, philosophical question, or literal?
Existential. Take it however you want.
Yeah. Gosh, well, again, I love to roam on beaches. I like
Mm,
not the moonlit walks on the beach. I love sunset, love dusk. If I'm up early, and that's only been when I was in Hawaii or someplace, I like, because like the times have changed. I might like a sunrise walk. I love wandering in hikes in the woods in our like lovely national parks. That's a great way to
yes.
see a lot more of the terrain of the country and other parts of the world. And I love like seeing new places and experiencing new people and learning new traditions, things like that. So that way I very much roam. So yeah.
I love it. And I like the fact that you say learn while you're roaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think makes a wise woman is
Yes.
her inability to stop learning
Yeah.
and being curious.
Yes.
So what makes you restless in a good way?
Ah, gosh. What makes me restless is am I not, and as someone who's like, she said like something along the lines of like not dreaming of labor or trying to tie her value to the things that she's doing. But for me, I do get restless if I'm not doing something new or different, right? Like I'm not. am I living up to like the best potential that I can put out there to the universe? And if not, I get restless. I'm like, I could be doing more. And I try to find, the ways to contribute and do. And I think it honestly, those of us who started businesses probably can relate to that sentiment.
Oh, the constant drive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, Atima, I can't even tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Thank you so,
Yeah.
so much for
Of course.
being on the podcast. And how can people get a hold of you if they want to talk with you?
Oh, yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are.
Yes.
And you also on my website, you can reach out there, especially if you know folks who are women, folks of color, women of color, especially who are thinking of running for office or organizations. You can use my services. So,
Absolutely. I will definitely get all of those links in the show
mhm.
notes. And
Yeah.
folks, you will have a true, true learning experience when you're talking with Atima. So make sure you take a look at her sites and all the things that she offers. It's not just limited to what we talked about today. She's got a lot more to offer. So, Atima, thank you so much. And I will talk
All
with
right.
you next time.
All right. Thank you, Julie.
Julie Noonan here. Thank you so much for listening to Roaming with Restless Women. If you're a successful senior woman leader who would like to be on this program, please visit podcast.intuitivewisdomcoach.com. If you enjoyed this interview, please share this episode on social media and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show, and they mean a lot to me, my team, and most importantly, my restless guests. As a special gift to you, our listeners, I offer a free one-on-one 15-minute breakthrough session. Bring a problem and experience how coaching works to see if it could be of value to you. Sign up for an available time on my website, intuitivewisdomcoach.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.